Hello, I'm audible to all.
Yes, you are audible.
So, very good afternoon to all attendees. So, this particular workshop is being conducted in association with Swechha and Alumni International Alumni Network Department of States, and with the help of this Strom Overseas. So, after giving this brief idea about the sponsors of this particular webinar or workshop, I will start today's topic of discussion. So today I'm going to discuss about miniaturized electrochemical sensors. So before starting my exact presentation, I would like to give you idea about the work, the persons who has involved in this work. So I'm grateful to acknowledge my PhD students J. Murli Mohan, Sohan Dudla, postdoctoral fellow Dr. Karunisa Amreen, and my fellow investigators Dr. Sanket Goyal and Dr. Arshad Javed. So with this, if I start with the presentation with a brief idea about the BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus. So BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus is a part of BITS Pilani University, which has 4 campuses. It started from Pilani in 1964, then Dubai in 2000, and then Goa 2004, and Hyderabad is the youngest campus, which started in 2008. So if we start outline for today's presentation, I would like to start with some basic discussions about the miniaturized sensors. When we talk about the miniaturized sensors, first point come in our mind, then why miniaturization? Why not a bulk system? Then next we will talk about brief basic idea about what is sensor and what are the detection mechanisms that is being used in the sensors. In addition to that, we will be starting with an overview of next generation smart sensors. What do you mean by next generation smart sensors? Having idea about next generation smart sensors and detection mechanism, we will follow up with a colorimetric sensors, and that we will take as a case study where I will try to explain you the development stages of sensors, miniaturized sensors. As an example, we will consider nitride sensors that is being developed in our lab. That will follow with electrochemical sensors. So in particularly, I will start with overview of electrochemical sensors. And after that, we will discuss some key development of microelectrochemical sensors that is being developed in our lab. In that context, few are biochemical sensors and few are environmental sensors like hydrogen and hypochlorite sensing applications. So if we start with the miniaturizations, the first point come in our mind, what is MEMS and what is microfluidics? So technologies that is combined with mechanical and electromechanical elements is called MEMS. So the physical dimensions of MEMS is varying from application to applications. It may be a very small in micron size, or it may be up to certain millimeters also. MEMS devices can be a very complex device which may have multiple moving components, or single cantilever can be also a MEMS device. So it always MEMS devices, sometimes it has integrated microelectronics that is inbuilt with this miniaturized devices. These days, in addition to that, there is separate field is growing that is called microfluidics. So microfluidics is the engineering that uses devices that apply the fluid flow in the channel, a small channel. Particularly when we talk about any device that is governed or that is basically follow the fluid flowing through a small channels. These small channels may be in the dimensions of millimeter, maybe in dimensions of micron, or sometimes in the nano dimensions also. So microfluidic devices are very, very popular these days because it handles very small quantity of reagents, and it can easily integrate with the several other multiple assays. So combination of these microfluidics MEMS devices, we call it as a lab and chip, which facilitate various processes that is related to industrial and biomedical applications. So that question arises, why we go for miniaturizations. So these times, modern industries or modern community demands for intelligent system. A system should behave intelligently, multifunctional or multitasking is required. A system behavior should be robust. At the same time, its cost should be also low. So when we say about the low cost, it means material savings and the process of manufacturing should be having ease, and batch manufacturing is permissible. So these kinds of features are very easily can be acquired with the miniaturized systems. And these miniaturized systems sometimes or in many cases work faster. So they are rapid. At the same time, if you have a miniaturized systems, you can utilize for variety of applications. One of such application is point of care applications or point of source devices, where the device can be in the form of a portable tool, which can be taken to the site of application itself. Whereas the ultimate features of this miniaturizations is not only of ease of applications or not only for making them intelligent or smart, but at the same time, altogether physics also playing a great role. So whenever we are going to a lower dimensions or scaling effects, we can better utilize in so many cases. So many times people say these microfluidic devices are dealing with the big physics in a small channel. So by this way, we can extrapolate or we can exploit the newer effects at the micro level or nano levels. At the same time, these micro devices provide minimum material and sample. So all these demands of industries or modern communities is coming out from the miniaturization. So these miniaturized devices found many applications, which is highlighted here. I'm not going through it. It is very, very common, and it is difficult to identify in which area these devices are not fitting or not suitable. So when we say microfluidic devices or MEMS devices or miniaturized devices, so it involves a variety of process while fabrication and at the same time from application front. So it has microfabrications, which involves chemistry. At the same time, application side many times or many processes involves biology, mechanical mechanics, control systems, physics and fluid transport, numerical modeling and simulation, material science, are few to mention here. It gives a fair idea that this is not belongs to a particular branch of engineering or science, but it is an interdisciplinary subjects. And a wide variety of applications we can see here for the miniaturized or MEMS devices. So out of that, the pioneer application is sensor or sensing applications. In addition to that, there are many other applications like mixing, fundamental understanding of biophysical process, biomedical diagnostics, energy harvesting. One of my colleagues will be talking about energy harvesting also today. Then drug delivery, electronic cooling, drug screening, and many more. So when we talk about the sensors or micro devices, it follows certain steps from conceptualizations to the design or final product. It starts from design and simulation, which involves variety of simulation tools or some in-house coded people are using to understand the dependent parameters, which parameters will, how it affects the physics, and what are the dimensions on which one should work before starting the experimentations. One can go for the simulations. So one can use multi-physics softwares or their own code if the physics is allowing that particular software and code. Then at the same time, there are a variety of fabrication processes are involved in the micro fabrications. To name few: photolithography, direct laser writing, soft lithography, laser engraving, paper-based 3D printing, and many more. With the times, the processes are evolving at greater pace. At the same time, these devices or sensors use certain detection methods. These detection methods can be broadly classified in the optical. When we say optical, most time it is related with some colorimetric or image-based analysis. At the same time, luminescence-based. Luminescence in broader sense, we say chemiluminescence, and a subset of chemiluminescence also available in the form of bioluminescence. These devices, before using or before targeting it to a particular applications, we have to characterize and we have to analyze. So there are testing and characterization is essential part in the process value chain of these kinds of device manufacturing or design. So very first step, I will take few minutes to make you aware what is modeling and simulation. So modeling and simulations, basically the problem physics is captured with the help of mathematical equations, and these mathematical equations can be solved by two methods, either by classical mathematics if the problem is solvable, but most of the practical situation classical mathematics does not make it very difficult to solve these types of problems. So people rely over the numerical methods. So in these numerical methods, there are a variety of modeling approaches are being used. So up to certain limit of the dimensions, characteristic dimensions, one can use continuum fluid mechanics. If the continuum theory is not valid, one can go for the molecular approach. And in molecular approach, molecular dynamics or multi-physics simulations, if multiple physics are involved. So why to do these simulations? Because before starting experiment may be costly, and n number of experiment is required to understand the physical phenomena. Beforehand, one can perform experiment and understand the physical phenomena at the greater length. So these are the importance of modeling in this. So with this brief idea about the miniaturized sensors, we will start talking about the sensors. So sensors, as you know, anything which can sense something. When I say something means, in basic terminology, we call them as a measurand. Anything what we want to measure, we use certain device, and that device is called sensors. These sensors may be a qualitative sensors, yes or no basis, or it may be a quantitative sensors which quantify the particular measurand values. So name of the sensors are given based on the measurand. At the same time, it is given based on the way in which we measure. Like today's topic of discussion is electrochemical sensors. So this classification is based on the how we are going to measure the value of quantity of interest, that is we call measurand. So in MEMS or microfluidic sensors, as I have earlier discussed a little bit, it can be classified into three subheads: optical detection, luminescence detection, and electrical detection. Optical detections has two subsets: colorimetric and image processing, then chemiluminescence and bioluminescence as the part of luminescence. As a result of chemical reaction, if some light is coming and that is considered as a detection parameter, then it is called chemiluminescence. And subset of chemiluminescence is called biochemical luminescence, where this chemical reaction is taking place in a living organism. Then the light which is coming out is called biochemiluminescence. At the same time, there are another detection method is impedance and interferometry. Electrochemical is a very suitable, or we can have very sensitive methods for the detection or sensing purpose. So before starting this electrochemical sensors, we will talk a little bit about colorimetric sensors. So particular analyte or particular substance can be sensed by change of color. So these colorimetric sensors these days are very popular in the biomedical applications. So one such applications we are demonstrating here by development of IoT enabled miniaturized sensor for nitride sensing. So why I have taken this as an example of next gen sensors, because it uses IoT also. It is smart in the sense because we need not to bother about the bulky systems and the data handling and data storage and data transmission. We can use the data and transmit through mobile phone. We can geotag the information. So all these features, these small sensors can have, and such sensors which is having multiple features and which perform multitasking and which is easy to handle and it is cost effective can be categorized as a next gen sensors. So as an example, we are talking about IoT enabled miniaturized sensor nitride sensors. So as you know, nitrogen is prevalent within the environment and physiological systems, which is a crucial component for sustaining life, and it is very essential. So as you know, to meet the requirement of grain and other things, vegetation, we use inorganic fertilizers. These are inorganic fertilizers through the water draining, it is coming to the drinking water and water sources, because it is nitrite and nitrates are highly soluble in the water. Strong availability to reach the ground and below the surface of grounds. So if you have this limit is more, it provides acute toxicity, detrimental effect like carcinogenic effects, nitrites, and at the same time, this nitrite detection in the saliva indicates the oral health. It is also a biomarker of UTI infection. So these are the motivations to study or develop a miniaturized sensor on nitrite. So this briefly, I am going through the different steps of the development of sensors. So we do first simulation to come out the dimensions of a particular microfluidics channel. So here we can say two inlets are there, one inlet for the reagent, another inlet for the sample, and it is following through a channel, small dimension channels. And this is the detection zone. As a having reagent reactions, this will change color. So here in this case, we are using grease reagent assay for detection of nitrite. So, and beforehand, we have performed multi-physics simulation with the help of COMSOL to find out the suitable dimension. At the same time, this is actual fabricated microfluidic channel. So here it is 3-layer channel, PDMS channel, and adhesive tapes, and at the other side we have PMMA to make it the channel close. At the same time, detection zone, we want to make the sensor smart, so it should have detection. So colorimetric detection is converted here, photometric detection using light emitting diode and photodiode. The photodiode selection was done in such a way that photocurrent is linearly varying with the irradiation, and which changes the voltage across the resistance, and in turn which gives the intensity. So this photometric detection is being used, and just to amplify it, we have designed the transimpedance circuit, op-amp circuit, and amplifier circuits, and for that this is the PCB. So as a result of grease reagents, this kind of color change, pink color, and pink color intensity will quantify the amount of nitrite present in the sample, and that is calibrated in the linear range of voltage variation for these sensors. So this you can say device output, another side we have absorptions, and concentrations are varying. With the known concentrations, we are able to generate a calibration chart. And these all data are transmitted, connected through the Bluetooth connectivity. It is connected to the mobile, and through geotagging, you can transmit this data to any location or any user and application. So this is, I think it has given a fair idea about the different steps involved in the development of miniaturized sensors. Now I will talk a little bit about electrochemical sensors. I may be a little bit fast here. So electrochemical sensors, using mostly we are targeting here about the 3 electrode systems. So in these 3 electrode systems, one electrode is called working electrode, another electrode where there is an oxidation and reduction reaction of species that are involved. The another electrode is a counter electrodes, which serves to complete the electrical circuit of electrochemical cell or system. The reference electrodes provide reference for the assessment of other measurement parameters. And mostly we use potentiostatic technique, that is also called as chronoamperometry, measures the current flowing through the working electrode as a function of time at constant potential applied to the working electrode. And whereas the current flow is correlated with the concentration of oxidized and reduced species on the surface of working electrodes. It means there is a requirement to achieve a surface activity at the working electrodes. So in the process of development of electrochemical sensors, we have to modify the surface nature of a working electrode. And that is what, by modifying and obtaining suitable current peaks, we can sense any analytes. So to study the analytes, measuring the potential and current in the electrochemical cell containing the electrolyte is the basic principle, where we use colorimetry, voltammetry, and potentiometry. So these are some techniques, as it is mentioned in the slides, measured over the time. Another one is current measured over the potential, and potentiometry, difference electrode potential is measured. Potentiostat is device that is being used to control the 3 electrode cell, which I have discussed earlier. So mostly these potentiostats are in the form of circuits. It is simple op-amp circuits. So with this, if we say here this is the 3 electrode system is replaced with the, in the potentiostat it is replaced with 2 impedances. So like this means a potentiostat is required to perform the electrochemical sensing operations. This potentiostat may be a bulk system or maybe it is a miniaturized systems. If we use miniaturized system and miniaturized 3 electrode systems together, it can be a next generation electrochemical sensors. So this is what already I have explained. So as a result of this, you can find out this redox loop, or in this redox loop, one peak is showing oxidation peak, another peak is showing reduction peak of the species. Based on the quantity of the current, we can specify the sensing application. So as applications, I will take one example here, miniaturized PMMA platform for biosensing application. So what is the motivation to do this? As you know, ascorbic acid is an antioxidant which required for immunity and cancer prevention. At the same time, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is playing crucial roles in the Parkinson disease. Uric acid is another type of purine which is basically controls the metabolisms. At the same time, there are metabolism byproducts are there, xanthine. So if you have a sensor which can sense all together, because they coexist in a human sample or real samples. So with this motivation, we have developed this sensor. So this is the step-by-step process. I may be a little fast. So here 3 electrode in the miniaturized form on the PMMA slots we are using here. So AgCl, Torre paper and carbon electrodes. So out of these 3 electrodes, 1 electrodes will be working electrodes, another will be reference electrode, and one is the counter electrode. So counter electrode, this here we have used Torre paper, which is having excellent properties in the form of, because Torre paper has inbuilt microfluidic channels, and this is basically having carbon fibers, and it is very suitable for electrochemical sensing or fuel cell applications. So average fiber size is 6 to 7 micrometers that is being manifested. It is quite visible in the same images of the carbon paper or Torre paper. So we perform cyclic voltammetry, and we are also performs scan rate to understand the chemical electron activity at the varying scan rate values taking place at the working electrodes. At the same time, if you look here, we have performed different scan rate and identified the linear ranges. So these linear ranges are shown here in the inset of the diagram, which gives a good value of R min values. So the concentration effect, we try to vary the concentration and make a concentration plot, calibration plots. So it is giving the linear ranges of the sensing application. So here on the slides, it is mentioned in what range these can be sensed by developing this particular sensors. So with this, at the same time, as I mentioned, these bioanalytes are biochemicals are present or in a real sample, or we can say coexist. So we have to find out their interference. So for that, we have performed interference studies, and it has been observed that there is no interference among these biochemicals. At the same time, to confirm the interference, non-interference situations, we have performed DPV, and the current variations observed negligible, which indicates that these biochemicals are not interfering to each other during sensing application. So as a matter of fact, this miniaturized platform has been developed. If it is being integrated with a miniaturized potentiostat, it can be utilized as a next generation sensor for biomedical applications. So in time constraint, I will move to one example of environmental sensors, and then others I am skipping. So last example I am discussing here, 3D printed devices for hypochlorite. So these days, hypochlorite is very commonly being used for surface disinfectant. It is also being commonly used for water treatment plants, chemical industries, swimming pool, clinical industries, and food industries. And concentration of hypochlorite is crucial to deciding its use for different applications. Why it is important? Because not only it governs the economy of a particular industrial applications, but at the same time, high concentration can pose several serious human life threats, not only for human life threat, but also it is a threat for environment. So keeping these minds, it is essential to develop a miniaturized sensors for the hypochlorite detection. So for that purpose, we have used Torah paper. Which is modified with the gold, which worked as a working electrode. And we have used counter electrode and reference electrode of protopasta. Reference electrode is modified with AgAgCl. So, and we have used 1 milliliters of analyte, very small quantity. And for this, usual voltammetry studies has been performed, and it is giving very good result with the non-interfering, with the coexist chemicals. So with this, I would like to close this session. So thank you very much. I'm thankful to the organizer. At the same time, I am thankful to the Swechha and Alumni International Alumni Network, Department of States. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dubey. That was a wonderful session. Dr. Satya, if you can please take over from here.
So I assume I'm audible.
Yes, you are, please.
Yeah.
Loud and clear, and you are visible.
Yeah. So good afternoon to one and all. So this session will be discussing about wearable sensors. So the outline of the talk would basically be a brief introduction about flexible and wearable electronics, and then we'll be going in details about the works that we have been doing towards the development of this wearable sensors and development of basically the next generation smart sensors. And at the end, I'll be also discussing about a very recent field that we have been working on, which is known as transient electronics. So with this, if we start with the basic definition of flexible electronics, what do you exactly mean by flexible electronics? It's basically a technology that allows us to fabricate or integrate the devices onto a flexible substrates. So if you see the trend, how the technology has basically evolved, first the electronic devices were in our rooms, then basically they came in our bags, then into our pockets. And the next big thing that is going to happen is basically the electronic devices can be integrated onto the body. But the conventional silicon technology is rigid, and the future technology that we are talking about is about integration of this electronic devices onto the body, which is soft and curvilinear. So there's a gap between the conventional silicon technology and the future technology that is predicted. And one of the possible solutions to this is the development of flexible electronic components. So whenever we talk about the flexible electronics, it is not only that the devices are basically fabricated or fabricated on flexible substrates and integrated onto body. It is the technology that allows us to integrate the electronic devices on the surfaces of everyday objects. So I would like to tell that it is not a flexible and a variable technology, but it is actually a every variable electronics technology. So whenever we talk about this flexible and variable electronics, there are two important things that we need to see. The first important thing is the substrate on which this electronic devices are fabricated, and the next is basically what kind of functional materials you are using it. So first let us see about the functional materials that we basically use. So whenever we are talking about materials and in specific functional nanomaterials, in general, the nanomaterials can be basically defined as a materials whose one of the dimensions is confined. So, and based on the dimension confinement, we can basically group them into three categories. So which are basically displayed on the screen as 0D, 1D, and 2D. So, and our research mostly focuses on the development of 2D materials-based flexible electronics. So, again, just to give you a brief idea about these 2D materials and how these materials have been evolved and what are the new types of materials that people have been researching on. So basically the research on the 2D materials started way back when graphene was basically invented. And then the different classes of 2D materials basically evolved after graphene. So one among them is transition metal diacrylinides. It's a whole lot of family, and it has very specific properties which are better than graphene. So it is like some properties of the TMDs are very much better than graphene, and hence for specific applications, these TMDs are very much useful when compared to graphene. And post TMDs era, now recently, if you talk in a year or so, or a couple of years before, there have been very good research on other types of 2D materials such as black phosphorus and the single layer of silicon, which is known as silicene or borophene. And lately, there have been a huge surge of research basically on MXenes, which are again different types of different class of 2D materials. So basically, there is a whole lot of explosion of 2D materials post graphene era, and it offers a very huge potential in electronics because of the fact that these materials have tunable band gaps, and once you have a tunable band gaps, the possibilities of applications become numerous. So, having said about a very brief about a 2D families, and most of the works that we do in our lab are basically related to the graphene and the TMD families. And lately we have been started working on black phosphorus too. So having said about this nanomaterials, the other important component as I was talking about is the flexible substrate. So there are various flexible substrates available, and to classify them, they can be classified as polymeric substrates, which includes one such example is basically displayed on the slide, which is polyamide film. But there are several others such as PET, PEN, and PDMS. And which have this excellent properties. Apart from that, the other substrates that have been widely used in flexible electronics, or for that matter variable electronics, are paper, and then the other class of substrates basically are metallic foils, which can be aluminum foil, copper foils, nickel foils. And then lately again there have been a good amount of research done on textile based electronics, and the substrate that we use for developing those type of electronic devices are threads or cloths. Now the substrates are fine. Whenever we are talking about substrates, these are low cost, these are biodegradable, these are metallic in nature, and so on. So but are these substrates microfabrication compatible? This is the question that we need to ask. So, and what do you mean by microfabrication compatible? It means that can we take this substrate directly into the clean room and start working with it like we do with the conventional silicon technology? The answer is basically no. Some of the processes can still be done with the polyamide, but for the rest of the substrate that we have been talking about, there's a big no. We cannot take these substrates into the clean room and start fabricating devices on it. So the first step when we talk about variable sensors or flexible electronics is that we need to develop a process for the substrate that are not microfabrication compatible. So what do you mean by process for the substrate that are not microfabrication compatible? It means that the functional nanomaterials that we discussed, how are we going to deposit, or how are we going to make a device with these functional materials and using with this flexible substrates? So that is the first step towards the development of the flexible electronics. We need to develop certain processes such that the devices are fabricated, like they are fabricated without even going into the clean room. So having said about some brief about the functional nanomaterials and also the different types of substrates that we basically use in flexible electronics, coming to the application that it offers, basically it is ubiquitous. The applications of flexible electronics are everywhere. And if we want to specifically tell for variable sensors, also each of these application that is listed here can be applied as a variable sensor also. So it can be a wearable photo detector, it can be a artificial skin, which can be basically put on a specific part of the skin, which can act as a pressure sensor and which can sense the touch. So it can be a capacitor, which can again be a capacitive pressure sensor. It can be flexible batteries to power these flexible devices, or it can be a FET based sensor if you want to basically tune the sensitivity of the sensor. So coming to the specific application that the topic demands, that is the wearable sensors. So why do we basically need a wearable sensor? So we have a lot of physiological signals in our that are being generated by the body. The signals can be in a form of physical signals. It can be a chemical signal. So in this case, most of the signals that are given are physical signals. So in that case, it can be a temperature, it can be breath, it can be motion detection, it can be the hydration level of the guy, or it can be a simple pressure sensor. So all these things, if we combine and if we make a sensor to sense all these quantities, it will be very useful for the person to have a personal healthcare monitoring system. Rather than every time going to a doctor and checking, he can basically have the sensor integrated onto the body, and then he can check his temperature, he can check the hydration levels, or he can even check the human motion monitoring. And all these things, when we talk about the next generation sensors, the signals that are coming from this or the transduction mechanism that is happening after the sensor has sensed, the signal basically, or the data basically goes to the smartphone, and also it basically saves in the cloud. So it is very, very important that we develop such sensors such that the biomedical field basically is moving ahead. So, and coming to the roadmap of the wearable sensors, so where do we stand now in terms of wearable sensors? So if you see at the right side of the image, there are different phases of how the phases will be evolved according to a review that was published in 2018. So the phase 1 is already over, wherein we have these bulky devices and we have this limited sensing functionality. We need to basically go to the doctor and check it. Now, presently we are in an era where the phase 2 we are experiencing, wherein we have commercially available some gadgets which are low power, which are miniaturized. Just to give an example, a simple Fitbit that people wear, such that they can basically see their heartbeats or how much time they have slept. So we are in that era as of now. The phase 3 that is going to come in near future is the combination of all these heterogeneous devices, and they will be basically flexible in nature. So the next big thing, as I was telling you, is the flexible electronics. And the other thing that is going to happen is the multi-sensing signals. So the sensor will not only sense a single signal, okay, it will not only sense temperature, it will also sense different parameters. So this is going to be the phase 3, and again, the phase 4 would be basically a patch that can be that would be lightweight, that would cause no irritation on the skin, and they will be highly sensitive, and definitely it would take a while for this type of sensors to be commercially available. So I assume I have given a very brief overview about flexible electronics. What is flexible electronics? What type of materials do we use to make flexible sensors? What are the type of substrates? And basically, what is the roadmap? What is going to be the future of these wearable sensors? Now, having said about all these things, so what are we doing? What our lab is doing is the next session of the talk that we are going to discuss. So we are working towards the development of multifunctional sensors, again for personal healthcare monitoring. And I'll be talking in for different physical signals. So the first thing that I'll be talking about is basically the breath sensors. So or for that matter, before basically to fabricate any device, okay, to fabricate any device, we need some fabrication techniques, and that I have not discussed as of now. So in general, I will not discuss it for every project. How do we fabricate? In general, the processes that we need to develop for making this flexible sensors, I'll just discuss in briefly. So and it is very specific to 2D materials. So the methods to produce 2D materials, or for that matter to directly grow these 2D materials or deposit these 2D materials onto various flexible substrates are the first method is a hydrothermal method, and you can see its merits and demerits. It's a low temperature growth process. But the major problem with this method is that you do not have any control over the thickness of the material. So, is this a big problem? Yes, it is a big problem because, as I told you, these 2D materials are layered materials, and the number of layers basically determine the electronic properties. So, if there is no control over the thickness, so you basically cannot have the control over the electronic properties. But anyway, it's a very easy method, and it's very, unless and until you do not want to tune the band gap of the material, it works perfectly fine. And the most well-known method that people have been using for the growth of 2D materials is CVD, chemical vapor deposition, and it is famous. It is famous for the monolayer growth of any 2D material, for that matter. So it basically starts with graphene, and then the TMD families and the other families I was talking about. And the deposition rate is very high. Further, it does not require any vacuum like we have for atomic layer deposition or PLDs. And but the only demerit that this chemical vapor deposition has is the operating temperature is very high. And with this again comes a very it becomes a very good research problem, because if the temperature is very high, we cannot directly deposit this kind of proper monolayer or few layer 2D materials onto the flexible substrates that we were discussing, because those flexible substrates that we discussed cannot be operated at such high temperatures. We cannot operate polymers at such high temperatures. We cannot have paper-based devices. We cannot use the paper-based substrates at such high temperatures, and hence that research basically comes. So people basically go for the alternatives to CVD, which is hydrothermal as one of the alternatives. The other basically is the exfoliation, which is very simple, and but the only thing is it's more of manual. I mean, there are different types of exfoliation techniques. It can be a mechanical exfoliation, it can be a chemical exfoliation, but it is very tedious process, and the yield is also low. And like CVD, it involves a very tedious transfer process to basically transfer it onto the flexible substrates. So whatever upcoming slides are there, whatever the application that I'm going to discuss will involve either of the fabrication techniques. So I'll not be going into details about the fabrication techniques. I'll be talking more about the applications that we have developed. So the one such application, or before we again go to the application, we can have one such example to show you guys how do we fabricate this flexible based devices. So the example that is displayed on this slide is a hybrid combination of MOS2 and Cu2S, which is on cellulose paper. So basically we take a cellulose paper, and then basically we do a seeding process before we actually go for a hydrothermal growth. And with these parameters that has been displayed on the slides, we can easily get a uniform growth of MOS2 on cellulose paper. We can do a double hydrothermal method such that a hybrid is getting formed. In this case, so once you have grown MOS2 on cellulose paper, you can use that as a substrate and grow Cu2S on top of that with again this desired parameters. And at the end, to basically measure any electronic signals, you need metal contacts, and then we define the contacts using silver paste, or sometimes we go with copper tapes and several other methods. So now coming basically to the applications, the first application is basically breath sensing. But before we basically go for breath sensing, it is very important to understand whether the device that you have fabricated is basically sensing humidity or not, because the breath molecules contains humidity. Okay, majority of the breath molecules that we breathe have relative humidity greater than the atmospheric humidity. So it is very important to check whether the fabricated device is sensing humidity or not, and then we can go to a real-time application of breath. So we fabricate this kind of devices, and we check whether they are sensing humidity by preparing different saturated salt solutions. And as you can see in the graph, whenever the device is experiencing a high relative humidity, the current basically increases. The increment in the current is basically due to the fact that the water molecules are electron donating species. So basically they donate the electron to the MOS2, which is again an N-type material, and the current increases. Now, again, once you compare the performance of this kind of devices with the hybrids always perform better. In this case, again, if you see at the last slide, wherein in the down portion of the slide, wherein a band diagram is drawn. So if you in air, the Schottky barrier height is very high, but under the humid atmosphere, wherein the water molecules are very high, due to the electron donating species of the nature of the breath, the Schottky barrier basically decreases, and that contributes to the increase in the current. So having established the fact that the materials or the device that we have fabricated is very responsive to humidity, we basically do breath sensing. So whenever we exhale a breath, definitely, again, just to repeat one more time, the breath molecules are electron donating species, and that's why we get these peaks. And each peak corresponds to each breath taken. Now, to make it more specific, to make a more specific application of the breath sensing, what we did basically is try to check the humidity level of the or the hydration level of the lungs. For that, we did a very simple exercise wherein we asked the individual to basically to do a breath sensing with the fabricated device and also with the commercial device. And as you can see in the graph of E and F, the graph which is displayed in E is basically for the commercial sensor, and the F is the fabricated sensor. So the relative humidity is very high, and in this case, the delta R by R is also very high when the patient is or when an individual is very still. But once we ask the individual to have a sprint and then come back, and we do not allow him to drink water, the relative humidity of the breath basically decreases, and that is very much evident from our devices also. And then basically we don't ask the individual to again drink water for the next couple of hours. And as we can see in the next couple of hours, the individual basically regains the hydration levels. So it was a very nice initial experiment to understand that this kind of sensors can be used to check the humidity levels of the lungs. And all this data is basically transmitted to the smartphone. Okay, and as I told, the number of peaks basically tells you the number of breaths that you have taken. You can always count the number of breaths that you are taking. So definitely this experiment was performed on a only on a healthy individual, and it was an initial proof of concept. So the other parameters that we have tested are temperature. It can be a body temperature, or it can be a flame sensor. And again, I guess the graphs are self-explanatory. As the temperature increases, the resistance is decreasing, and it is a simple semiconductor phenomena. As we did a simple experiment of flame off and flame off, flame on off experiment, and as you can see, there is a like a peak is very prominent. Now coming to more applications towards the physical sensor. So one such physical sensor is strain sensor, which can be used as a pedometer for the calculation of the number of steps that a person is taking, and by a mathematical formula we can also calculate the calories that he has burned in that specific duration. So basically we fabricate a sensor and then integrate onto the knee, and the moment that individual walks or he runs, the strain is developed in that particular sensor, and then we get a peak. That peak basically is the current peak, because all these sensors are resistive sensors. So again, each peak corresponds to each step that a person has taken. And all this data basically is again transmitted to his smartphone, that for how much time he has walked. And also it's basically a simple, it's kind of a Fitbit application, but it involves a proper sensor. It does not work on the AI or ML concepts like the Fitbit does. So, and again, by a simple mathematical formula, we can also calculate the number of calories he has burned. So one such more example of the strain sensors that we developed is for the gesture communication. So this kind of sensors are basically used by the people who cannot speak, or who are hospitalized and they need some assistance. So this strain sensors basically can be integrated onto the fingers of a patient, and then the specific movement of the fingers will basically send in specific signal to the third person. It can be a doctor, it can be a guardian, it can be a nurse. So again, we developed an Android application wherein we have he can basically send a text. He can basically send whatever he needs. So that app was developed, and that sensor worked perfectly fine. So this is basically the digital the circuit that was used. So as of now, basically we are using Arduino board, but we plan to replace this Arduino board by a miniaturized circuit in the upcoming research. And the front end screenshots are displayed down. So so the sensors that we discussed till now were resistive sensors. So it were basically a two-terminal device. But if you can leverage the properties of a three-terminal device, which is an FET configuration, we can basically tune the gauge factor for a strain sensor, or for that matter sensitivity of any sensor, because we can easily modulate the current that is flowing from source to drain by the application of gate. So we tried to do that. We made a paper-based field effect transistors, and that was used for human motion monitoring. And as you can see, that the fabricated device was again integrated to the smartphone, and whenever the device basically like experiences a strain in the device, the pop-up comes as motion detected. So, and the reason for using a three-terminal device, as I mentioned, is we can basically, by application of different gate voltages, we can get different gauge factors. So, and why do we need that? Because it can be applied to different applications depending upon the range of gauge factors that a particular guy wants. So the other applications that I want to show is the artificial electronic skin, and I would like to show the fabrication process also for this, because it's fairly simple and anybody can do it at home also. So basically in this case we chose eraser as a substrate. The reason for choosing eraser is because the eraser is highly stretchable and bendable when compared to papers and other polymeric substrates. And then we use a functional nanomaterial. In this case we use CNTs. And then we did a simple rolling process. But definitely the rolling process creates many very much non-uniformities on the deposited functional nanomaterials. So we do a pre-compaction hydraulic press of a specific pressure such that the non-uniformities, even though they are not totally eliminated, but they are somewhat nullified. And then we passivate the entire device by the polyamide tape. Now, since eraser is basically a dielectric, we can do the same process on the backside of the eraser. So if we do on the backside of the eraser, so it basically becomes a capacitor also. So on top side we have a resistor, and if we on top side we what I mean is, like, if you have the metal contacts only on top, it can behave like a resistor, and if you have the metal contacts on top and bottom, it can basically behave like a capacitor. And to leverage this also, we used multifunctional sensing, so wherein the same sensor can be used for strain as well as for pressure. And I'll be talking brief about multifunctional sensors also later. So that is very, very important, because in this case, there is no need of the front end to distinguish the signals from where the signals are basically coming. So in this case, if the signal is resistive in nature, definitely it has come from strain. If the sensor is capacitive in nature, it has come from pressure. So and then the real-time application, as we have been discussing, these sensors are basically integrated onto the different parts of the human body. And then one more beauty of these sensors is that they are able to distinguish the tensile and the compressive strains also. So, and because the particular body part can produce compressive, and the other body part can basically produce strain sensors. And later we developed an array of these pressure sensors, and it was able to locate the shape and location of the unknown object that was kept on it. So it basically becomes a proof of concept for the artificial skin. So so this is another type of application that we have already developed. And just as the other application for the pressure sensors can be the drug dosage monitoring, wherein in many cases a person who is taking the medicine has to take a specific amount of medicine, but but he takes many of them. So just as again as a proof of concept, we developed this drug dosage monitoring system wherein the pressure sensor can be integrated onto the inside the capsule, and then if the capsule has been taken out of, or if the medicine has been taken out, the specific signal will basically go to its guardian, doctor, nurse, and then if he is taken, if more number of medicines are taken out of the cover, it can also send an alert. So this again, I'm not going to show the entire picture how we developed it. It's just an overview of the entire system that we had developed. The other is again a respiration sensor, but the reason for showing this again is basically, again, this is something that you can do it at your home. So we basically again took a graphene powder, and then we can make a graphene pencil out of it, and then you can trace this pencil on graphene pencil on the paper and make your own respiration sensors. So in this case also, just to again give you a very vague idea of what kind of breath patterns that this sensor can sense. It basically can sense the fast breath, it can sense deep breath. And how do we distinguish them? We distinguish them with the frequency of the peaks and the amplitude of the peaks. So we can easily distinguish whether the breath that is taken by the individual is fast, deep, slow, or it has a very high level of hydration or a low level of hydration. So it can be used if the data is properly extracted, it can be used to detect many diseases later. So, and I'll skip this part because it does not have much relevance here. And this again, I would like to just tell that since we have been talking about 2D materials, so there is a new 2D material that I have been talking about, that is black phosphorus. So the major problem with this black phosphorus is that the moment you synthesize this black phosphorus, it gets oxidized. So we try to develop a strain sensor based on black phosphorus on paper substrate, and then passivating it by PDMS. So the PDMS passivation not only prevents the oxidation of black phosphorus, but also it basically it also increases the flexibility. And then again, it was used for a human motion monitoring. The two things that we achieved in this research is basically a black phosphorus based sensor, which is stable for 98 days, because black phosphorus is highly oxidized. It is very difficult to make the device stable for 98 days. That was one thing that we achieved. And also the sensitivity and all that we achieved was better than the conventional counterparts. So I'll skip this part in the interest of the time, but I would like to tell, I will take a couple of minutes to discuss about this field, which is known as transient electronics. So transient electronics, just to tell it in a very vague manner, it's an emerging field wherein after the usage of a particular electronic device or a sensor, the sensor can be basically put into the triggering factors such as water or humidity, and the device will totally disappear. So the field basically evolved due to the fact that many of the conventional electronic devices use silicon, and it is contributing to a lot of e-waste. And also with the development of flexible electronics, most of the flexible electronics are also fabricated on polymer substrates, which again are contributing to the e-waste indirectly. So this type of technology might take care of the e-waste, because the devices can totally be disappeared. So, and the other motivation of bringing this field was in biomedical, because once we do a surgery, we put the electronic devices into the body, and we need another surgery to remove them. So basically, we can do a surgery and put this transient based electronic devices, and with the due course of time, these devices will disappear. So we do not need another surgery. So these were the two main motivations why this field evolved. And we have been trying to do our part in this. So we have been successful in developing multifunctional sensors which are water soluble. And this is again the sensing that we have been doing is again pressure, breath, and strain sensing. And as you can see at the down left part, these devices are basically water soluble. So in 360 seconds, the device basically totally disappears. So to conclude the entire talk, yes, it is possible to fabricate this flexible electronics without even going into the clean room. We can do this simple processes and fabricate this devices which works very well. The electronic waste can be reduced basically by fabricating more and more devices on cellulose paper rather than polymer substrates and silicon. Multifunctional sensor is possible. I did not get much time to discuss about the multifunctional sensors, but it is possible by the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And lastly, the water soluble electronics is a reality. Okay, and the smart sensors and the smart devices that can be worn on human is definitely the future and has many potential applications in many diverse fields. So thank you for your time, and if you have any queries or if you have any discussions, you can always email me, and then I'll be happy to discuss that. And I would like to thank the organizers and especially Professor Sanket Goel for this wonderful webinar and giving me an opportunity to present my work. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Satya. That's a wonderful session on wearables. Now I would request Dr. Arshad Javed to take over, please.
Yeah. So let me share the screen. Screen share. Yeah, the slides, I hope the slides are visible as well as I'm audible. Isn't? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Fine. So I welcome you all in this particular session where we are going to discuss fuel cell. And I'm thankful to the organizer as well as Sweksha Alumni and International Alumni Network, as well as Department of State to support this particular webinar. So let us come to the topic. And the topic is, as you know, fuel cell. You should be curious that what are you going to take out from this session, okay? So let us see what is the learning outcome from this session. So first of all, we'll quickly discuss through the basics of macro or bulk fuel cell. Then we'll know what are the benefits. Why does this fellow is so much a kind of hot cake nowadays? What are the different type of benefits we can get from that? And then we'll talk about the working. We'll just see a slide on working and construction of a macro or bulk fuel cell. Then we'll talk about a specialized fuel cell, which is called as microbial fuel cell, and it's really very fantastic. We'll learn about that. And then we'll see that how and why we should take it to the miniaturization, what are the issues we are going to face there, and what are the different benefits we are going to get. And we'll see what are the types. Actually, you learn what are the types and how the microfluidic fuel cell works. And then finally, we'll discuss about the research opportunities in this area, and that is the challenges, and you can say the various issues that motivates you to work towards this area. So let us start with the classical theory. So a bulk fuel cell or a macro fuel cell works based on electrochemical reaction. And this reaction is a kind of oxidization as well as like reduction reaction that happens in a closed vessel. And then there is a transmission of electron from one species to other species. And this transmission of electron is looped in such a way you generate a kind of energy, correct? So let us see who were the gentlemen who proposed this idea initially. So we find in 1839, yeah, it's so old area. In 1839, a German scientist, Christian Friedrich, first of all, proposed this idea to develop a kind of fuel cell out of these chemical reactions. And later in 1842, Sir William Grove coined this idea to develop a fuel cell, and they actually developed, you can see the fuel cell, the kind of fuel cell which was developed. So let us see the heart of this fuel cell as we talk something about redox reaction. So this is actually reduction oxidation reaction. So what actually happens, there are few species or elements or compounds which are taken into this reaction. And one of the species undergoes reduction while other undergoes to the oxidation. And when this happens, actually there is an electron transfer from one part to the other part, okay? We'll see a particular chemical reaction of this reduction plus oxidation reaction, where you can see Fe2O3, and there are different oxidation numbers are shown here. For Fe, you can see it is +3, for oxygen it is -2 here, and for carbon it is 0. And then after the reaction, what you calculate, for iron it is 0, and for carbon it becomes 4, for oxygen it remains same. So you see oxidation number changes, and that's how you figure out that something is going to happen, something happened, which is called as oxidation and reduction. And in a layman way, you can understand it in this way. You have two species, A and B, and A and B undergoes this particular reaction, where A undergoes lose one electron, a particular number of electrons, and it undergoes oxidation, correct? And species B go to gain that particular electron, and it is particularly reduced. So what you observe here, from one species to the other species, that there is a transfer of electron, correct? So this is the main idea. That is how we can generate the electricity. We can have a flow of electron or current in a particular circuit. So let us discuss the pros and cons of this particular methodology. So what may be the pros and cons? Before that, let us see image here. You can see a car here, okay? And then you can see a fuel cell, okay? And then what it fuel cell does, you can see that we have a hydrogen tank here which supplies hydrogen, and it takes oxygen from air, correct? So both reacts together, helps in redox reaction, and it generates water and heat, plus there is a flow of electron from one part to other part, which is getting utilized to run an electrical motor. So this is the whole idea. Now, in the light of this phenomena, let us try to see what is good and what is bad in this particular phenomena. You get higher efficiency. Why do you get the higher efficiency? Because when you take a normal fuel like gasoline, petrol, diesel, etc., you actually burn it somewhere and convert the chemical energy into the mechanical energy. Then mechanical energy get transferred to probably generate the electricity, and you use it, or directly you can use the mechanical energy to run the vehicle. But somehow in this fuel cell, you are going to reduce those intermediate stages of generating the mechanical output from a bunch of or a chunk of liquid fuel you have. So that is how, since you minimize many steps of generating useful work, so that is why the energy is always higher in fuel cell compared to engines. Then you can see one more thing, that is noise-free operation. This kind of fuel cell provides noise-free operations. And then the reactants has to be stored outside as you store the fuels, so similar to that. And in compared to the batteries, nowadays electrical driven vehicles and hybrid vehicles are there. So they have a particular life, like 8 hours, 20 hours, and so on. But for the fuel cell, the benefit is, theoretically, you say it runs for infinite time. And the constraint here is, as long as we keep on supplying the fuel into the fuel cell, it keeps on generating the electricity. So that is the thing. And then, unlike the batteries, when you charge and discharge the battery, after a course of time, you see that after multiple thousand times of charging and discharging, the battery actually deteriorates, and that is not going to happen in fuel cell. So this is one of the positive point. As a negative point, you can see that more space is required for a fuel cell when you talk about the bulk fuel cell. And then we have seen in few configuration, not in all, in few configuration, lot of heat is getting generated and water and emission takes place. So that is an issue. And then it requires a continuous source of flow of fuel and oxygen. Let us see the working. We have an animation in front of you, and you can see what is going to happen here. Let us try to analyze. You can see from one channel, hydrogen is getting entered here, and from other channel, oxygen is getting entered here. And you have a anode here, you have a cathode here, which is connected to an external circuit. And then in between, we have a catalyst which supports this redox reaction. And in the presence of catalyst, this reaction takes places. And this catalyst not only supports the reaction, but it also filters one motion. So what actually happens, you can see hydrogen molecules enters from inside, and from here you can see it reaches to anode, and you see the proton is getting moved from from the catalyst and the membrane, which is here. The catalyst also here works as a membrane, and then only proton moves from here to the oxygen side, while the electrons are wisely taken out from the cell through the wires and used as a power source. So that is how you can see it's a nice trick to take out only electrons from the reaction out from the chamber and not allowing the proton to move out from the chamber. At the same time, you allow the proton to move through the filter and not electron to move from the filter. So it's a kind of a nice mechanism or trick which is involved to develop this fuel cell. In another animation, probably this will be more clear to you. You can see the hydrogen fuel is entering here, and you have anode and cathode, and we have a membrane, and you can very clearly see that only protons are getting passed through this membranes, while the electrons are forced to travel through outside a circuit, and that is how we generate the electricity. Now coming to microbial fuel, what is that? So similar to the chemical reaction we have seen, there are bacteria. Okay, there are several kind of bacteria which separates or emits or helps to take out the electron from the waste product. Correct. So when you keep a bunch of bacteria in a waste water, for example, they undergoes like a reaction, and then electrons comes out from that. Now here again, you have to apply the same trick, and which is employed here. So the trick is to take out the electrons through the wire out from the circuit, and then the rest of the things will move towards the oxygen molecule. So let us see how it works. So in this video, you can see that the bacteria are generating electron through waste product. These electrons are not getting here. You should understand that the electrons are very high affinity to the oxygen molecule. They will go wherever the oxygen molecules are there. So till now, we are not allowing the electrons to combine with oxygen molecule. This is totally sealed. And then the electron moves towards the source of hydrogen, which is kept at the other side. And in between, we have electrical circuit, and we harness the energy. And here, at the membrane side, we allow the electrons to interact with the oxygen molecule. So this is how we are able to generate, we are able to harness the energy through the waste product and the microbes. Now, this was what we have seen just now. We have seen the basics of fuel cell, and we have seen that the kind of methodology involved to take out the electron from the reaction and use it as a current source. Now, here you should understand when we miniaturize this fuel cell at the micro level, the kind of power we are going to get is 0.03 to 450 milliwatt. Okay, it's low, and the output voltage also varies from 0.5 to 1 volt. Okay, though this 0.5 and volt, which is somehow good enough to charge your mobile phone, though it takes a lot of time. So the issue arises here, how to miniaturize this particular thing. And when you see this power output, you obviously think of stacking multiple cells so that you can increase the output which is coming out from here. Also, when you put the stacking, lot of issues comes out: size, internal resistances, connections, reliability of the device, and robustness of the device. So this is where we think of building a big cell out of multiple miniaturized fuel cells. So here itself, we should ask to ourselves, why are we going to devise a micro level fuel cell while the bulk fuels are available? Why do emphasize much more about generating minute amount of current and voltage and power and current densities while you have good amount of voltage and current getting generated through bulk fuel cell? So let us see this scenario. As you are well aware, there are a lot of focus on microelectronics and microfabrication techniques, which has led to different devices which were not possible probably 5 years back or 6 years back. If you find such devices like POC devices, smart cellular phones, and personal digital assistants were not available. Now, when these devices comes in market, they also put a demand on miniaturized power source. So these power sources can be batteries, fuel cells, and electrochemical capacitors, kind of things. So that is why we can understand that there is a need of developing such small micro level fuel cells. And then this power should be in tune with the functional requirement. Like if you implant a kind of electrical device in a human body, you need to implant the battery or the power source also. So if you imagine a kind of battery which works out of the things, the liquids and kind of chemical compositions available in human body, which are almost waste, or it will not extract much amount of kind of thing. So there you can implant such kind of micro cells or micro fuel cells, which will go inside the human body and generate the electricity, which will help the micro sensor to work upon. So again, it is similar to internal combustion engine, but as you know that multiple steps of generating the mechanical power is removed. That is why the efficiency is high. So now at this point you are a little bit what you call a kind of assured that yeah, there is a need of micro level fuel cell, and it has got a specific requirement. Let us see benefits of fuel cell over the macro fuel cell and over the batteries and other sources. So as you know, energy efficiency is high, maintenance cost is low as a fuel cell, noise, safety, high volumetric, power density, these all advantages are there. Device is simple in case of microfluidic fuel cell, because we eliminate the kind of catalyst layer and a membrane layer you have seen in bulk is not going to work here, because we try to flow the fuels itself in a colaminar flow, so that it generates its own transition barrier, and then only proton can move from one side to other side, and the electron can move outside through the wiring. So this micro fluidic fuel cells are membrane free, and that is how it makes it more simpler and more handy compared to the bulk fuel cells. So it reduces the internal resistance and bulkiness of the fuel cell. And then in few configuration where we use capillary action through the paver devices, through the other capillary devices, the fuel pump also is not required. So you can see here that microfluidic fuel cell, the small miniaturized fuel cell, has got many inherent properties compared to even a bulk fuel cell. And obviously we can make a self-breathing electrode which can take oxygen from the atmosphere directly. We need not to have external or peripheral agents to push the fuel towards the development of the power. Now coming to the basic construction, here you can see a Y channel, microfluidic fuel channel. I hope you are well aware of these technologies going through the multiple days of this webinar series, where you might have gone through the laboratories also, and you might have observed multiple type of fuel channels and microfluidic channels. So this is a kind of Y channel where we flow two electrolytes. One is oxygen and the other one is fuel along with H2O. And here you can see both are flowing very slowly. It's a kind of creeping flow. And when it flows in a creeping velocity very slowly, then it generates a constant velocity and it does not interfere to each other. And this undergoes through a laminar flow, and this is called as colaminar flow. Means this fuel goes in one flow and this goes in another flow, and there is no interaction, does not mix together. It get mixed together when you covered a long length. And beyond that, you can see that before it mixes, we put cathode and anode to this side. Now proton moves through this barrier to this co-flow, while the electron moves through cathode to anode, and this in this particular way. So what actually happens, you can connect a wire through cathode and anode, and electron can move in a closed circuit, and that is how you can utilize the current. And for instance, the redox reaction is shown here, which is, you can see formic acid plus oxygen, it converts to water and carbon dioxide, and it generates a particular amount of, for example, 1.5 voltage. So there are different type of microfluidic fuel cells, and these are based on electrolytes, different type of electrolytes, different type of fuels, oxidants, type of different electrodes which we introduce day by day, and different type of fabrication techniques which makes the task much easier. And then the physical configuration such as Y channel, T channel, F channel, and so on. So let us first of all quickly focus upon the fuel. So this chart is basically a literature review chart which summarize all the kind of fuel cells which are existing. So fuel, for example, if you take as a hydrogen, you have option of taking an oxidant as either oxygen or air. This is an option. People have taken oxygen, people have taken air also. Then for electrolyte, you can choose H2SO4, NaOH, or KOH. All three are possible for this combination. And then for anode and cathode, you get multiple options. And for channel, you have multiple options. You select a path through which you go, and you observe what is the kind of voltage, PD and CD, current density and power density you are going to achieve. Then you can experiment with hydrogen peroxide. People have done a good amount of experiment. They have taken fuel as H2A2, oxidant again as H2A2, and electrolyte. For electrolyte, few electrolytes are studied like H2SO4 and NaOH. And for anode and cathode, people have experimented different list of anode and cathode is provided here. So you can see there are different possibilities. And again, this setup can be developed in different kind of shapes of channel. Then if you use other different kind of fuels, for example, ethanol, methanol, formic acid, there are 3 fuels we are taking here. Again, we have variety of oxidant that can be used here. For example, you take ethanol, you can take air, you can take NOH, you can go with AgNPT, and you can make it with P channel. So this is a kind of class, correct? And you can see numerous combinations are possible. Each combination can be tested for their efficiency and power density. So this is the table which emphasize the uses of those all fuels and different electrolytes. So, and you can see the maximum current density and maximum power density. Basically here the difference is internal resistance that is going to play a major role. So if you see the power density is highest for a kind of methanol and dissolved O2 system. And then you can see somewhere it is 70 also, 70 milliwatt per centimeter square. And these are the different experiments which were carried by different researchers on the course of time. Now coming to the kind of electrodes that we can propose, the moment you develop a fuel cell, you think about many kind of possibilities of electrode where you need to infuse the oxygen or air, or where the electrode itself takes the oxygen as a kind of biological creature. So it is called as a solid electrode versus air breathing electrode. You can go for reducing the internal resistance by introducing graphite. You can put various catalysts on the graphite, or you can propose graphene also. And then latest work which is going on is on LIG, laser induced graphene, where the electrical conductivity is very high as well as it is porous. So you get the air breathing properties with high conductivity. Then if you talk about channels, you can have variety of fabrication techniques and methodologies, your own ideas based on which you can develop using PDMS, where you need to induce the air into the channels to take oxygen, or you need to flow another fuel, another kind of oxidant which will provide oxygen. You can even use, people have used paper also, paper devices, where it takes the oxygen and other things from air. It removes the water molecule and carbon dioxide in the air itself directly. People have used a threaded system also, where cloth thread, cotton threads are also used for developing the channel. Now I will quickly go through the few of the configurations. Like here you can see different configuration. So in figure A you can see T channel with electrodes at the bottom. You can again see in figure B T channel, where the electrodes are placed and on the side wall, and from here fuel and oxidants are coming. This is closed channel. Then again here you can see the porous electrodes are put, and the fuel and electrolytes are coming again through the same channel. This is all about T channel. Then here you can see F channel, where the electrodes are arranged in particular way, and somewhere it is self-breathing, somewhere you need to provide the oxidant. And in some configuration, these are through the graphite pipelines through which the electrolyte flows, and it takes the oxygen from the atmosphere, and anode and cathodes are connected accordingly. Then again you can see another configuration where people have used graphite layer here, which is sandwiched between the acrylic sheet, polycarbonate sheet, and the channels are provided the connectors for electrolytes. And these, you can see in the graphite sheet there is a connection to make it working as an anode or cathode. Then in the parallel top to bottom approach, you can see that here in this channel it is made through the surface etching process, where the flow is one over other, not side by side but one over other. And you can see the fuel is flowing below and oxidant is flowing above that, and you develop a colaminar flow here, and above that and below that we have anode and cathode. Similarly, you can have many different kind of configurations. People have different patents on their configurations. For example, here you can see this is a long lasting channel where the fuels are introduced, the concentrations are maintained, and the byproduct, that is water and carbon dioxide, that is taken out from these channels. Now here also you can see the same thing, which is through syringe pump, oxidant and electrolytes are flowing together, and you have a cathode and anode connected here, and it flows through channel. And obviously we need to provide oxygen source like N2 and O2 gas and the electrolyte also. Here in a specific configuration, you can see the graphite rods are mounted, and anode and cathodes are similar to like these graphite rods works as anode and cathode, and fuels are flowing through this one. And since this is porous, it can breathe, or it can take oxygen from atmosphere. So this is also one configuration. Now coming to the last point, last thing which I am supposed to discuss is paper devices. These paper devices are now like recently proposed, where the concept is it will use the capillary action to take the fuel as well as the electrolytes and oxidant if required, and then the paper is going to exposed in the atmosphere, where it is able to breathe the oxygen by its own self. It is going to emit the water to the boundaries of the paper, and carbon dioxide which is getting emitted, it will be directly dissolved into the atmosphere. So that here also different configurations are proposed. Platform is mostly cellulose paper, or different type of grades of paper can be proposed. Enolite and catholites are there. There are different like hydrogen peroxide, formic acid, air, and so on. Anode and cathode, people have worked a lot, and you can see different type of power densities are provided by these cells. So few devices I will show here, like a paper based device. Here you can see that it is just, it's a sheet, thin sheet over which a paper sheet is laid, over which the graphite electrodes are fused, and you can see the fuel when it flows through there, it maintains a co-flow and the electron flow from through these electrodes. Here also you can see this is a kind of file which is proposed, and it is between the two polymer foil, and between the two polymer file the paper device is sandwiched, and then it works as a closed device. Here you need to provide oxidant as a separate from a separate source. Now in the same line we have also done some experiments, and we have developed a kind of a paper device on which we use pencil graphite to scribble over the paper device that makes electrodes. We testified different type of grades of pencil, and we found a particular optimum number of scratching which you make on the paper to develop the electrodes, and then we find out what are the different grades of pencil which will be useful. And then we also worked upon the kind of absorbent pad which will try to enhance or reduce or control the flow over these channels. Then for developing the scratch on the paper, to develop the electrode, we also try to develop a kind of automated device which can produce multiple electrodes in one go, and thus the concept of this paper fuel cell can be imagined at larger scale. Then one of the interesting work we have gone through, we have experimented in our lab, and that was aluminum battery, kind of aluminum electrode is used here with bucky paper, and these electrodes actually gives higher response. And you see we have experimented, we were able to run a small scientific calculator for a few minutes to run upon, and then LEDs were able to glow through this this kind of aluminum fuel cell. Now let us at the end discuss about the research opportunities and challenges. So what are the different things which are still left in this area? Multi-stacking is a burning issue. We have shown you different laboratory setup, but still a setup or kind of product is required which will be useful in the real life application. Then reduction of internal resistance. So people are trying different kind of electrodes and different kind of configuration through which the internal resistance of the cell can be minimized and you get more power output. Then how to enhance the electrode performance, that is the performance in terms of absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere or from the oxidant, or have a minimum resistance value. Flow optimization, it means that one should know that what should be the type of flow at which you get the maximum amount of voltage or current or power density. Then device stability, like if you take a cell and you have a what you call a kind of reservoir for putting the fuel and oxidant electrolyte, so you should know that what is the amount of time through which it goes longer towards 1 day, 2 day, 2 hours or 3 hours, something like that. So that is called as device stability. So people are working towards increasing the device stability. Then miniaturizing the overall size. We thought about many things at laboratory level, but finally when you wanted to develop a product to run my mobile phone, to charge a mobile phone, to have a device to powerize the pacemaker or kind of different biological equipment, you need to think about a smart and compact device. So still this part is left onto you. Then maintaining the co-flow with constant concentration. As you know, you have seen the equation. For example, formic acids converts into carbon dioxide and water. So how to take out this carbon dioxide and water out from the cell and to make it more constant, and the concentration can also be made constant with amount of time. Then we finally talk about adaptive system. Adaptive system is what? Suppose if your cell is getting diminishing in the performance, there should be some changes that should happen automatically, either to the flow rate, to the electrode gap, to the kind of electrode, or something should happen in the fuel cell, so that you always get a constant output from the fuel cell throughout the stabilized lifespan of the cell. So this adaptive system is still pending for researchers to work upon. So and many more things, if we keep on talking, we keep on developing ideas and to work upon. So these are the few things I thought to expose to you towards another what you call horizon of research in fuel cell. So with this I close my small lecture on fuel cell. Thank you very much. If you have any question, you can pass on to the organizer. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Javed.
Yeah.
Dr. Goel, sir, are you taking over?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I am.
Right, sir, please.
Yes, good afternoon, participants. Good afternoon, all the previous speakers and the organizers. My name is Sanket Goyal, and I am from BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus, as my colleagues are. So other speakers also presented about the miniaturized devices, and so as I will also be talking about a different kind of miniaturized device. Primarily, I'll be focusing on viscosity meter. And I'm sure that we have been seeing and reading about viscosity since our childhood days, since our elementary and high school days, and we all know what does it mean. So before I start, I would like to thank our sponsors, Swechha, who's a Delhi-based NGO, and the grant has come through the International Exchange Alumni Department of State, and this is given to the Fulbright alumnus from time to time. So I really thank to these people for giving us an opportunity to be able to conduct. First, we have done a training session last Friday, last Thursday, 23rd of this month, and then now we are doing this workshop. And I also thank Storm Foundation, Storm Overseas Education, for coordinating this this workshop. So I have around 20 minutes with me, and I'll try to justify these 20 minutes. So before that, why do we need viscosity measurement? We need viscosity measurement for many applications, and one application which you see here is fuel adulteration. And needless to say, it is extremely important to be able to determine what kind of fuel is being intaken into your automobiles. It not only is a harmful to the economy, but also it is detrimental to your automobiles, as well as it leads to a huge amount of pollution. The second thing, which is popularly used application, is the milk adulteration. And again, we all know that it is susceptible to our health as well as to the taste, to the economy. So there are a couple of examples I have given, and in terms of the direct health examples, you can see that there are many diseases, for example, cardiovascular, mental health, cancer, diabetes. So many diseases which can be detected when you can develop a device which can measure viscosity. Of course, it is debatable, but up to some extent, there is a proven fact that if we can find a device which can measure viscosity in a desired window, we can possibly detect some of these diseases. And you can see in this inset cartoon that huge number of deaths are going on because of the cardiovascular disease. And of course, it happens our economy, and you can see that a lot of money has been put together in finding a solution to these diseases, and which is even more than the overall GDP of our country. So it's extremely important. So as I can summarize that there are a lot of problems like adulteration to monitor the blood parameter for various diseases, which I have just mentioned. And the challenges are cost, time, accuracy. Depending on the application, we have to find a solution. And depending on the solution, we have to find whether we can do a multiplex solution where we can measure multiple samples at a given time. So there are multiple applications. So one common parameter as I have just presented is viscosity. And of course, if you would like to eradicate these challenges, the one solution can be seen through microfluidics. So we are foreseeing to develop the microfluidic viscometer. We have been working on this domain for last several years, and we have tried to develop some handheld and movable prototypes so far. So I will show you some of the things because of the time issue. I will not show all the examples. I will just take one or two specific viscometer which have really come to a shape which can be commercialized. So, well, those of you who are interested to know what is assured, so you can Google it. You can find out that the World Health Organization, which is in news in the recent past because of variety of reasons, they have put aside assured challenges, which means that any device which is here to give a answer for any diagnostic issue, it should talk about these 6 to 7 challenges. So, well, background, I will not spend time, but just to say in 2 lines that why we are talking microfluidics. I mean, those of you who have done some chemistry experiments, which I believe most of you have. So in a normal chemistry experiment, we mix 2 different flasks and aliquot them, as you can see from this image. So which is very manual. It depends on many parameters. But when you do it in a more automated and robust manner, the aliquot process is extremely automated and extremely uniform. And also, whatever you do in a chemistry lab or biology lab on different batches, you can essentially create a small zones in a small chip, which can be of a size of microscope slide, like a couple of inches by a couple of inches. You can do whatever you do in a lab on a single chip. That's why this domain is also popularly called as my lab on a chip. So they are based on various physical principles. One of them is the laminar flow. And those of you who have studied this particular physical property, they can appreciate that there is a certain regime of Reynolds number by which we can see a Reynolds flow, and then surface interfacial tension, and finally the capillary forces. Again, as the lecture is being recorded, so I urge all of you to please go through the below mentioned links to know more about these factors. So one of the popular viscometer which is used all around is called Oswald viscometer. It's like a U-shaped capillary tube. And what they do is that they try to measure the time the fluid will take to move from B to A. And the time will tell the viscosity. There is a control experiment, and then they do the real experiments, and then they can postulate what is the viscosity of the unknown sample. So essentially, it is very bulky, it costs a lot, and it is fragile. So you can lose it in a matter of week. So you need to go away from such viscometers. Okay, so we have to do some modeling as we do in any device development, fabrication, and then characterization and testing. So we have broadly divided into 2 fabrication strategies. One is the paper-based devices and 3D printed devices. But today I will primarily focusing on 3D printed devices because of the paucity of time. So yeah, so if you would like to start any new development, first thing you have to write down a small equation. So those of you who have seen this equation before, I really appreciate, but you have not, please go through this equation. It's very simple equation. If you talk about any microfluidics, this equation is something which you can never avoid. So if you see a small channel, it depends on 4 different parameters. The viscosity depends on 4 different parameters. W is the width, delta P is the change in pressure, Vm is the velocity, and is the length. So essentially, if you would like to find out the viscosity of a known sample, you have to eradicate 3 parameters and try to concentrate on one. So you can do in many different ways. You can either see how the viscosity is proportional to the width square, and also somehow you can also manage how the viscosity is proportional to time it takes. So I will tell you a little later about it. So viscosity, if you see this parameter, it can be W1 square upon W2 square, as simple as that. And then you can deduce a device where you can measure the width, and you can find out the viscosity of a test fluid by knowing the viscosity of a reference fluid. Of course, imaging is required, which is something is not the ideal scenario, because if you would like to use it in a more on-field basis or movable prototype, it really hinder our chances to be able to use them. So, but it is good to do scientific research, and it's good to understand how it works. So I'm not going to discuss any work which we have done. In fact, we have done a lot of work in this area, but I'll quickly jump to the electrical based testing, which is non-optical. So if you again play around with this equation, you will find the viscosity is proportional to delta T. It means the time the fluid takes between two known points in a microchannel. So you can see that if you have a microchannel, if you have a straight electrode, if you have a vertical electrodes, so when a conductive fluid will move and it will hit 5 different spots, if you know the distance between the two consecutive vertical electrodes, you can find out the time it is taking, and by that time you can find out the viscosity. So of course, a lot of work has to be done. You cannot just keep it manually time-taking process. You have to make a control box which can automatically take the time and will tell you in turn what is the viscosity. And more than anything else, you have to develop a device which can have embedded channels and the relevant microchannels. Yeah. So yeah, I will skip that. So this is something which is from the paper device, and I promise you I will not talk about it, so I will skip that. So in terms of the, again, same equation, so you have to work around it, and you can find out the viscosity is proportional to the time it takes. So if you can develop a device where you have a microchannel and you have 4 different electrodes, and which means 3 different inter-electrode distances, and you can throw a liquid or fluid inside it, and you can measure the time it takes between 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, take an average out and measure the viscosity. As simple as that. But you have to develop a automated device, you have to develop a micro fluidic device, you have to embed the electrodes, you have to make the microprocessor, you have to develop a mechanism to switch on and off the device. You have to develop the electrical contacts, microprocessor is set. So a lot of development has been done in this process, and I will show very quickly what kind of impact these developments can foresee. So some of the requirements which I have summarized, whatever I have shown in the previous slide. So as I promised to you, I will not talk about paper. So let me just please allow me to skip those papers, paper-based devices. But I will show you only one picture, which probably try to motivate you to see that what kind of commercialized devices which we can foresee. So yeah, I will skip all these things, but I will focus on this. So you can see that a simple piece of paper which has wax coating on top of it, and it has these screen printed electrodes. And screen printing is popularly done by making the wedding cards or any card. So basically the same kind of methods which is used to make commercially available wedding cards can be used here, is rather indeed has been used here. And these are the simple filter paper, and you can see that all of us are using filter paper every day. So if you can throw a liquid at one side of a filter paper, it randomly moves towards all the directions. So to directionalize the flow, we create the wax boundary so that the fluid remains only the non-wax areas of this device. And then you have 2 spots which can get the signal out of the fluid and tell me how much time the fluid will take to go from this point to this point. So we have developed a small microprocessor. Just imagine it is like 2 inch by 2 inch by 2 inch, like a printer cartridge. The chip can go inside and you can sort of clip in, and then microprocessor is hidden inside this box, and it is nicely measure the viscosity, and you can measure, you can see the viscosity, and you can sort of connect to Bluetooth, which is residing in a camera. And not only that, you can also provide the power to this device using the same smartphone. So you can do a lot of fancy things using these devices. And you can, we have tried to measure various different biological samples. You can see some of the albumin, human saliva, and lysozyme. Those of you who are bio backgrounds, not even so, you can Google them and find out what is the importance to measure the viscosity of these particular enzymes. So, and of course, human bodily fluid. So we have tried to test them, and gives us quite interesting and quite benchmark results when we compare it with the conventional devices. Now I will I will skip that. Again, we have tried a different method to use the paper. I will skip that. But now I will talk a little bit more about the 3D printed device in the next 3 to 4 minutes and before I conclude. So as I said that we have to create the boundaries which can sort of tell me the time the fluid is interacting at the intersection. So this is something, the overall philosophy. We have created the 3D printed device, very simple 3D printer which can be purchased a few tens of thousands of rupees. And you can see the black zones are the conductive zones, and the other zones are certainly non-conductive zones. So when the fluid will move from right to left, it will hit all these zones, and we can find out the time it is hitting those intersections. So even though it looks like a very bulky system, very lab-based prototype, but I will show you in the next couple of slides how this has been evolved to develop a handheld and a movable prototype. So we have tried to find out the viscosity of some fluids like acetic acid and milk, and which really is very well compared within the experimental error when we compare to the benchtop devices. And you see a little more bulky device. Now we are going from lab prototype to a small box, which is of the shape of a external hard drive or external battery. So you can see that this has a microprocessor, a simple Arduino, few hundred rupees, and simple screen, again few hundred rupees. So overall cost might be 1,000 plus rupees, and you can see that in that is such a small amount of capital expenditure, you can create a viscometer, and in fact the Oswald viscometer itself costs around 15,000 rupees, and which is again fragile. And this chip is reusable because we can wash it off with, we can prime it, and the chip itself will be maybe 10 rupees or even less than that. So some circuitry which I can skip. So you can see that we have tested it for various different samples like again milk and acetic acid, and which works well in comparison to the standard solutions. Yeah. So finally, just wanted to share with you that how the lab-based prototype has been evolved to a completely packaged viscometer. As you can see, that is the in-house motherboard, which has been developed using a simple printed circuit board method. And you can see this is another version of the device which embedded electrodes. And you have these pumps to drive the liquid, and you can just prime it. You can play around with many different facets of this device, and you can measure the viscosities. And we have tested with various different biological samples, enzymes, albumin, and so on. So this shows how the overall development of this device. Yeah, and just to conclude, we have also shown that, well, BD stands for denaturization. When you heat them, it sort of decircularize. It's kind of open up the overall biological sample. So please pardon me that I don't want to spend too much time on biology, but the main objective you can appreciate is that the blue means our device, and the red means is the benchtop device. So in all the cases, it is matching and within a few percentage of plus minus error, which is quite acceptable. Let's not too much worry about what we are going to detect right now. So yeah, so let me summarize the work which we have done in terms of viscometers. We have used various different methods. We can categorize them into paper-based device and the 3D printed device. And most of the prototype which we have developed are lab-based, and of course lab-based to be able to develop as a movable prototype, and quite inexpensive. And we have tried to test not only the milk and typical chemicals, but also various biological samples as well. So just to conclude, I want to sort of pamper our lab that we are having many different fabrication facilities in the lab. And the work which we have seen earlier, most of it has been done in the same lab, which we jointly investigate, all four of us. We have various 3D printers. We can do photolithography, soft lithography. We can make devices out of paper, and we can do testing using optical means, electrochemical means, impedance means, or many different kinds of methods to detect the diagnostic devices. And we have many characterization tools. The latest baby was Raman spectroscopy, and we have a common facilities. And those of you who are interested to work and collaborate, you are most welcome. We also have a clean room, which is, I would say, I think one of the only academic clean room in Hyderabad. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but very few clean rooms, very few academic clean rooms in our country. And we can do class 100 processing as well as class 1000 processing. And I would like to acknowledge many collaborators and funders who have supported us generously to be able to initiate our work in not only in viscosity meter, but also many different sensing and energy harvesting applications, and some of the examples you have seen today. I would like to conclude. I would like to show several of our PhD scholars. I could not take all of their names, so but the lab has around 18 to 20 PhD scholars and postdocs and various faculty members from few departments. And last but not the least, I would like to thank Swechha, who have given us the support to conduct this workshop and previously held training program. Also, the International Exchange alumni who have motivated us to apply for this project so that the people at large, especially the students, can be benefited. Uh, Finally, I would also like to thank Jagdish and his team from STOM to coordinate with us to be able to uh, reach to all of you, all the participants, in a very timely and efficient manner. So thank you very much for your valuable time and kind attention. Uh, uh, I'm not really sure whether we have time to ask questions, but we'll be happy to answer those questions. You can go to our website mmne.in, and our email addresses are mentioned there. Our phone numbers are there. You can contact us, and you can feel free to ask questions. And those of you who are interested to work in our lab, we'll be happy to guide you and support you to accomplish your futuristic career goals. So thank you so much once again, and wish you all a great evening and good night. Thank you so much. Over to Jagdish.
Thank you, sir. That's a wonderful session. Let me just do the closing remarks, please.
They should come from me.
Yeah.